latest thing on the list to do for you guys, because I had a couple of requests for this, is to do a cleaning video. This is not necessarily specific to a CZP09. I'm going to use my CZP09, but you can basically use the following for essentially any semi-automatic pistol, because they all pretty much foul the same, some a little bit differently, but again, cleaning them is pretty much the same. Lubing them is also pretty much the same, but in this particular video I will go ahead and say that the lubing routine is specific to the P09. So first and foremost, a couple of things that I use. Really simple stuff. You can get it at basically Home Depot. You've got some eye protection. I know that sounds weird, I'll explain why. We've got some eye protection, we've got some rubber gloves, just because my guns are usually pretty disgusting. This P09 has over 5,000 rounds through it, and I think the last time I cleaned it was, I don't know, 2,500, 3,000, 4,000, I've lost track. So it's pretty dirty, at least if I recall correctly. We also have a lubricant syringe filled with motor oil, because that's really all that I use as far as my lubricant. I don't buy gun specific cleaners, because you're literally paying like 3 times the cost, 4 times, 5 times, 10 times the cost for essentially, you know, vegetable oil or some derivative of that. So none of that stuff is really worth it. So I just buy a quart of motor oil, synthetic stuff, and it's lasted me years. I mean, I'm probably 3/4 of the way through a quart of motor oil, and that's, you know, running 25 different guns over the last 6 or 7 years, and a bunch of ARs, and shooting a lot, and using a decent amount of lube. So you know, 3/4 of that quart is still there, and it cost me like $5, so it's a pretty good deal. The one thing that I did buy, just because I needed some grease and I didn't have any, is this TW25B. It's a synthetic gun grease. It's disgusting. It looks like whale sperm. It's a pretty kind of white, relatively thick substance. We'll just leave it at that. I bought it. I've used it. It's not bad. It does stay in place. It does tend to migrate a little bit because it is on the more viscous side. But the usual grease that I use is a simple wheel bearing grease from Walmart. And it's super thick. It stays where you put it. It doesn't migrate. It doesn't move. Yes, it does hold carbon, but the nice thing about it is that it kind of creates a carbon-like slurry that acts as essentially a lubricant. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, the carbon is going to act as an abrasive, and you know, it's going to prematurely wear the gun, and this, that, and the next thing. And well, the carbon is very soft. It's not really an abrading, you know, kind of substance. So if that's true, okay. You know, if people have found that over the course of, you know, 150,000 rounds that the carbon has prematurely accelerated the wear of the pistol, my response to that is, you got 150,000 rounds out of it. So, you know, what's the problem? You know, if guys were running guns and, you know, they were running them dirty, and after 5,000 rounds they saw, you know, throat erosion in the barrel, or, you know, the frame rails were, when they mic'd them, noticeably, you know, diminished in size, then okay, I can see that there might be a problem. But so far, nobody's run a test where they've run a gun dirty for, you know, 10,000 rounds, and they've, you know, started at 0 and measured the frame rails, and then at 10,000 measured the frame rails of the dirty gun. And then said, yes, this carbon has conclusively gone ahead and, you know, removed X amount of life from this. So, you know, it's not a badge of honor that I run my guns dirty. I just haven't found a real need to keep them absolutely spotless. The reason why I don't clean them is because when I run a dirty gun, I know that I haven't futzed with it, meaning that when I come off the range, or if I carry a gun off of the range hot in concealed carry, the last time I shot that gun, it worked, which means that I haven't introduced any kind of variables in myself, i.e. taking it apart and then putting it back together. These guns are very simple. It's really hard to mess them up, but you never know. So when I leave the range knowing that my gun functioned the last time I shot it, and it functioned exactly how I want it. If for whatever reason it didn't function the way that I wanted it to, then I know that we're going to go in for a bit of a cleaning, because it's about time. So, you know, if I notice that the gun is operating sluggishly, I'll either add more lube. If that doesn't do anything to it, I'll go ahead and actually take the gun down and clean it. because again, at some point, carbon and all that unburnt powder and the brass shavings from feeding the bullets into the chamber, and then whatever else is going to be introduced into the gun, it will start to cause some problems. So again, you can't run dirty guns forever and expect them to last, because that's just not the case. But you can run them a lot longer than what conventional wisdom says. So I'm going to put on my safety glasses here. This is going to be the world's easiest cleaning routine for you guys to follow. I use non-chlorinated brake cleaner. This stuff breaks down carbon and deposits and basically whisks it away. And the really cool thing about it is that because it's pressurized, you don't really need any elbow grease. There are a couple of aspects of this whole procedure where I will use just a little bit of elbow grease, but for the most part, really not that much. It's very simple to do, and I really don't need to use all that much effort in cleaning this thing. So that's why I like that that carbon cutter, or I should say that brake cleaner. So we've got a pretty nasty pistol. It's looking fairly rough. I mean, you can see that a lot of the carbon deposits are basically sitting in the trigger control group, or the fire control group. And it's not that big of a deal because you don't notice a lot of that grit in the trigger, because if you've adequately lubed and greased, all of that kind of crap just sits there. It's not really in the action parts. And when it does get into the action parts, like I mentioned before, it does create a bit of that slurry effect where it just kind of whisks it back and forth as the parts operate against each other, and it's really not a detriment to performance. So as I'm talking to you guys, I'm just kind of like looking over the parts of what we've got here, and how things are doing. It's pretty gnarly. This is a dirty gun. I honestly don't remember when I last cleaned it. If I went back through my videos, I could probably get that information. But let's just say it's been at least 2,000 rounds since I've cleaned it, because it's looking pretty hideous. Now, there's a lot of caked on carbon in this area, on the actual breech face, not breech face, the chamber portion of the firearm where it locks in, and on the back side of the hood area here. This could probably use a scrubbing. I'm not going to scrub it today just because for purposes of the video, I just kind of want to show you what I do. But when you start seeing, three-dimensional objects on portions of the firearm where they're not supposed to be there, that are being created, little mountains of carbon, you're probably going to want to take a brass brush and just go ahead and, hit it with some solvent, and then just go ahead and scrape it off. Because over time, this stuff will really kind of build up and prevent the gun from going into battery. So, hit it before it gets to that point. So, this is what we're going to do. Eye pro on. All right, we're going to go ahead and take our carbon cleaner. And this is pretty messy, so again, never spray it in the direction of yourself, but you're going to go ahead and simply spray down the length of the slide, and all that carbon that was in there is gone. Now, one thing to note, you really don't want to spray into your breech face where the firing pin is, because if you do, you're going to get all kinds of crap and liquid in there that you really don't want in there, and you're probably going to end up pushing some of that carbon into that channel. So you want to just kind of stick to the underside of the slide. When you do clean your breech face, you want to have it hanging down, and you just kind of want to brush it just ever so lightly with the carb cleaner. Now, the nice thing about this non-chlorinated carb cleaner is that it basically evaporates almost immediately. So you're not left with a lot of residue where you're going to run into issues where the gun is sopping wet and you have to let it sit out and dry and all that kind of fun stuff. So to clean your extractor, you're just going to put the nozzle right next to it, and you're just going to spray underneath it. And it'll blast most of that gunk out of there. If it's really dirty, you can take a little nylon pick and just kind of pop everything that's in there out. So for the slide, honestly, that's about all that I do. There's really nothing built up in the actual slide rails, so I don't really touch it. There's no need to. My extractor tension is still fine. There's no grit. I haven't had any failure, so I'm not even going to bother with taking the extractor out and cleaning it. It's not necessary at this point. I find that people do more harm than good with quote-unquote preventative maintenance than simply just letting the pistol kind of tell you when it's ready. You know, if you end up going to the range and you've got a couple of failures to extract, then you know that you have to diagnose an issue, whether it's from your mag springs or from the extractor tension. So, you know, let the pistol tell you when it's ready. If it's a carry gun, you know, and you shoot the crap out of it, which I know a lot of people don't do, I don't, you know, then when you get to 5,000 rounds in your logbook, go ahead and change out, you know, the extractor parts and then run another 500 to 700 to 1,000 rounds through it to ensure function. So those are the things that you can do. But again, I usually run my carry guns about 2,000 rounds, and then periodically, maybe semi-annually, I'll bring them out, shoot some hollow points through them, and you know, 100 rounds of ball. And then if everything looks to be okay, back it goes into my carry rotation. I really don't shoot my specific carry guns all that often. So, you know, I believe in using the correct tool for the job, and I like a carry gun to be relatively new. I like it to be vetted, but relatively new. All right, so we're going to take our brake cleaner again, and we're going to spray it into the trigger components. You're going to want to get down in there. And I'm actually running out of brake cleaner for this video. Should have brought another can. Okay. Now, this isn't clean. If you can see in the video, all of this runoff, that's all the disgusting carbon that's essentially coming out of the gun. This gun is very, 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 very dirty. But yeah, for the sake of the video, since I'm running out of carb cleaner, there we go, got a little bit more in there. You're just going to blast it all out, let it run out of the gun. You're getting your trigger spring area, you're getting that locking block area, you're getting the trigger mechanism. Specifically on this particular gun, in the roller bearing area. That's the roller bearing area, or on a Glock, the cruciform area, where you're actually running the trigger bar, or in the case of a Glock, since it's all one piece, you're running the trigger bar against your connector. That area gets very dirty, and that's where you generate grit. On this particular firearm, on the CZ, you've got your roller bearing where the trigger bar essentially contacts, works the firing pin lifter, and then releases your sear. So you really want to make sure that's nice and clean. Now, as far as lubing goes, what we're going to do is we're going to, and some people might be appalled at this, but we are going to slosh this whole area on the side of the trigger bar with lubricant. On a Glock, you really don't need to do that, okay? Because again, the trigger bar in a Glock doesn't really ride against the side of the frame, whereas in this CZ, it does. What you're going to do is your roller bearing, you're going to slosh some oil in there as well. Okay? When you use that carbon cutter, you really need to go back and understand that the carbon cutter has stripped all of the oil, it's a degreaser, off of the gun. So when you are ready to, you know, start working the action, you really need to make sure that you're getting all the parts that operate against each other very well lubed. So on the case of the P09, you're getting that roller bearing area. You're also getting the sear where it interacts with the hammer, because those parts are always in constant rotation. As you shoot, they're always going to rotate. Okay, so we've got our trigger bar, we've got our sear, and we've got the hammer hooks now lubricated. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to move on to our trigger spring. In the case of the trigger spring, I like to use a little bit of grease because it sits there. Okay, and the grease is good because you've got basically a pin rotating on a spring. So for this stuff, you're going to shake it out, and you're just going to put a little bit of little dab on the spring and that trigger bar, and that will stay. Oil is too light, and it simply just drips right down your trigger. So if you take your grease and you impregnate that that pin area with that grease, it's going to stay exactly there. Whereas with an oil, it's, like I said, just going to drip straight down the trigger bar. So use something a little bit heavier if you can in that area. Also to note, on the roller bearing, if you are so inclined, using a grease in that location is also fine. It is going to collect dirt and grit, and it is going to get dirty really quick. But again, the grease will stay, which is what you want, whereas the oil is going to last 200 rounds, and then it's basically going to fall through the frame. So we've got our frame essentially done. The frame is lubricated at this point. If you want, and this is very similar to a Glock, you can take a dab of oil on each of the quote-unquote frame rails, and you can go ahead and just kind of get it in there. All right, so if you've got 4 frame rails, 1, 2, 3, 4, you can just put a dab of oil on those and consider yourself pretty much good. Also, on the P09, you can see that there is some wear on the locking block, just a little bit. So because something's rubbing on that, I would put a little bit of lubricant there as well. One thing that I will say is that unless you're working in a desert environment, and even then, you really want to kind of lube the gun more rather than less, because a gun will work dirty with lubricant. It won't work dirty with no lubricant. So, you know, there's a fine balance between, you know, the less is more and the more is less and all that kind of fun stuff. So for our slide, what I do is I take a little dab on the firing pin block right here, simply because that firing pin lifter comes up and hits that, so you're creating essentially a small cushion there. I will run some lubricant along the full length of the slide rails, and this will help distribute it along those 4 contact points in the frame, and that is it. Notice I didn't wipe anything down. You can take your paper towel, you can wipe it down. I mean, you can see that this is creating a disgusting mess here, where all of this carbon has come off, but you know, for purposes of the video, I haven't really wiped anything down besides my barrel's feed ramp, okay? This is the only thing that I will really wipe down very well, because it's one of those parts that is absolutely crucial to feeding. You can feel during the cycle of operation when you've got a very dirty feed ramp, the rounds actually hitting it. And when the rounds hit that feed ramp and the ramp is really dirty, if you're running hollow points or a non-round nose bullet, you can have a hang up. And it's something that happens, and it's something that you really want to avoid, especially, you know, considering even in competition, a lot of us are running hollow point profile bullets, or even flat points. So you really want to make sure that you get that feed ramp, not super clean, but the carbon, you know, slide that I had going on there, that slurry is now gone. So I just simply took that off. This is not mirror clean. I don't care about mirror clean. That has never been, you know, something that I've really, I mean, even from day one, I never really understood the desire to get everything mirror clean. It just doesn't matter. The carbon is so soft that it moves out of the way when the mechanical object is ready to actually make it move, make itself move. So we're going to take a little bit of lube. We're going to go ahead and spread it around the cone of the barrel. You can see where it's just a little bit of wear right there, nothing extreme. We're going to take, again, our lube. We're going to lube up the barrel hood. Again, nothing crazy. We've got a little bit of wear where this barrel is touching the locking block in the frame, so we're going to put a little bit of lube there. I put a dab in the center where our pin, our slide stop goes. All right, this is what holds the gun all together. One thing to note also on the P09 is that this lug, the lug that actually interacts with your magazine and lifts up to lock the slide back, it gets pretty dirty. They have done a relief cut in the P09s, so that way the longer profile bullets won't actually contact it. You can see that it has an angled cut on it to allow the bullet to simply pass beyond it. But one thing that you have to remember is that with some projectiles, it's a very close call, and when you throw in a lot of carbon buildup on that, it gets to be an even closer call. So the last thing that you want are your bullets scraping that, so just go ahead and wipe down the carbon on that. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and reassemble the gun. We're going to place our barrel back in there. We're going to take our guide rod. One thing that I do is with non-capture guide rods, always watch out where you're pointing them, because you don't want them coming slinging back in your face. I take a little bit of oil and I just throw it on my guide rod, because remember guys, that spring is not perfectly centered, so it's going to be retracting back and forth and compressing on that guide rod. So a little bit of oil never hurt anything in that location. So we're going to take the slide, place it on the frame. I'm going to go ahead and retract it slightly for the P09. We're going to press our slide lock through. Okay, now we're going to rack the pistol a bunch of times to distribute that oil. We're going to do a function test. Hammer drops, double action works. Pistol resets, fires, and we are good. So, in essence, that is the way that I clean and lubricate a semi-automatic pistol. Specifically the P09, that's how I lube the P09 itself. Again, after you lube this, you're going to have a bunch of oil coming out of the gun. That's to be expected. So, you know, just kind of let it all settle, wipe off whatever comes out of the gun, rack the slide a bunch of times, You know, see what happens, and then you know, just go ahead and re-lubricate if you feel like you need to. But as it stands, that's a pretty good feeling pistol. Nice and lubed.